Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're stepping right onto the wards for a clinical masterclass. I want you to imagine we're attending physicians on rounds together. We're going to systematically break down 3 incredibly serious, historically significant, and just clinically fascinating infectious diseases. We're looking at toxoplasmosis, anthrax, and plague. By the end of this explainer, you're going to have a highly structured, comprehensive understanding of exactly how these pathogens operate, how they present in a patient, and absolutely, how we fight back.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our syllabus for today's masterclass. First, the DAPSA framework, then toxoplasmosis, anthrax, and plague, and finally, a summary and prognosis. Section 1, the DAPSA clinical framework.
To truly understand complex infectious diseases without just suffering massive cognitive overload, we need a system. We can't just memorize a random list of facts, right? In clinical medicine, structured thinking is literally everything. So we're using a proven medical acronym to analyze our data today, DAPSA. It stands for definition, etiology, pathophysiology, signs and symptoms, investigations, complications, alternative diagnoses, management, and prognosis. This is our clinical roadmap for the entire explainer. Every single time we encounter a new disease today, we're running it through this exact diagnostic machine.
Section 2, toxoplasmosis, protozoal threat.
Let's apply our framework. By definition, toxoplasmosis is an infection caused by the Toxoplasma gondii parasite. Its etiology stems from undercooked meat, contaminated water, or ingesting oocysts found in cat feces. This is exactly why pregnant women are advised against changing cat litter, as it can be passed congenitally. The pathophysiology here is pretty insidious. You ingest the oocysts, and the parasite spreads rapidly as tachyzoites throughout your body. It then forms these long-term tissue cysts in the muscles, the eyes, and the brain. In healthy folks, it just stays dormant. But if immunity drops, like in advanced HIV, it reactivates. And honestly, how clever is this pathogen? In nature, Toxoplasma literally alters limbic activity in the amygdalas of rats. It removes their innate fear of cats and replaces it with a fatal attraction to cat odor. This ensures the rat gets eaten, so the parasite can jump back to its definitive host. It's a brilliant, terrifying evolutionary trick. Moving to signs and symptoms. Asymptomatic presentation is common for healthy patients, but in severe or reactivated cases, you'll see fever, myalgia, severe eye issues like chorioretinitis, and focal neurologic deficits from toxoplasmatic encephalitis. For investigations, we rely heavily on serology, looking for a 4-fold rise in antibodies or PCR. But if you have an immunocompromised patient with neurosymptoms, you need a head CT. You are looking for a very specific hallmark: multiple ring-shaped contrast-enhancing lesions in the central nervous system. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the alternative diagnoses shift completely depending on which organ is involved. If it's the central nervous system, you have to rule out viral encephalitis, a bacterial brain abscess, or even lymphoma. But if it's a systemic or ocular presentation, you're weighing it against CMV disease or tuberculosis. Context and immune status are absolutely everything here. Rounding out DAPSA for toxo, we have management and complications. Healthy individuals, they might not need any treatment at all. But for the immunocompromised, the gold standard is pyrimethamine plus sulfadiazine and folinic acid. If the patient is pregnant, we use spiramycin. The complications of getting this wrong are dire. We're talking toxoplasmic encephalitis, permanent severe vision loss, and fatal disseminated disease.
Section 3, anthrax, spore-forming bacterial infection.
By definition, anthrax is a brutal bacterial infection caused by Bacillus anthracis. Humans usually acquire it through infected animal products, skin breaks, or by inhaling spores. The pathophysiology is brutally fast. Spores enter the body, find a warm, nutrient-rich environment, and germinate. They instantly start producing lethal toxins. This triggers massive edema, rapid tissue destruction, and shock. Inhalational spores are exceptionally dangerous because they travel straight to the mediastinal lymph nodes in your chest, setting off a massive systemic illness. So symptoms depend entirely on the entry route. Cutaneous anthrax starts as a simple, painless papule, but it quickly evolves into a necrotic black eschar. Inhalational anthrax is incredibly deceptive. It starts like the flu, then suddenly drops off a cliff into severe dyspnea and shock. GI anthrax presents with bloody diarrhea. For investigations, we grab blood cultures and lesion swabs looking for large gram-positive rods. But the classic and, frankly, terrifying finding for inhalational anthrax is a widened mediastinum on a chest X-ray due to hemorrhagic lymph nodes. Anthrax is a master of mimicry.
A simple spider bite or severe cellulitis might easily mimic cutaneous anthrax early on. And early inhalational anthrax, it looks just like seasonal influenza or standard pneumonia. That widened mediastinum might even make you think of a mediastinal mass. You have to maintain a really high index of suspicion.
So the crucial point is how aggressively we manage this. If exposed, we hit it immediately with the vaccine and prophylactic antibiotics. We're talking ciprofloxacin or doxycycline, and you have to take them for a full 60 days because the spores can just lay dormant in your lungs. For severe cases, we add the antitoxin. The complications of untreated inhalational anthrax are grim: meningitis, profound hemorrhagic shock, and almost certain death. Section 4. Plague, Yersinia pestis pathogen. Moving to our final pathogen, plague is defined as an infection by Yersinia pestis. It's usually transmitted by the Xenopsilla chiopis, rat flea, or directly via respiratory droplets. For pathophysiology, the entry route dictates everything. Enter the skin, and it travels to the nearest lymph node, multiplying aggressively to cause the bubonic form. Enter the lungs, and it causes the pneumonic form. From either spot, it can spill into the blood, causing septicemic plague. The pneumonic form is a nightmare scenario because it allows for rapid, explosive person-to-person transmission without the flea vector at all. And this brilliantly illustrates the clinical urgency here. Symptoms hit like a freight train: sudden fever, chills, and extremely painful swollen lymph nodes known as buboes. In pneumonic cases, you get rapid respiratory failure. For investigations, we want blood cultures, sputum, and a lymph node aspirate, looking for F antigen antibodies or PCR. But listen, here is the golden rule. You absolutely do not wait for lab results to start treatment. If you suspect it, you treat it. Alternative diagnoses vary. Swollen lymph nodes could just be standard bacterial lymphadenitis or tularemia. Pneumonic plague mimics typical severe pneumonia. Septicemic plague, though, can mimic the severe systemic bleeding disorder seen in meningococcemia. Recognizing the clinical pattern is literally a matter of life and death. For management, step 1 is absolute isolation to stop a respiratory outbreak. Step 2 is immediate IV antibiotics. We use streptomycin, gentamicin, or fluoroquinolones for about 10 to 14 days. The complications are devastating: disseminated intravascular coagulation, profound septic shock, and rapid death. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 5, Masterclass Summary and Prognosis. We've run all 3 pathogens through the DAPSA-CAMP framework, but that final letter, P for prognosis, hinges on one single vital variable across the board, and that variable is time. In healthy people with mild toxo, the prognosis is great, but for severe toxoplasmosis, inhalational anthrax, or pneumonic plague, prognosis depends entirely on early intervention. A delay of just a few hours can trigger a fatal cascade of shock. So I'll leave you with this to think about. In a modern world where these pathogens still very much exist, how do we ensure our frontline clinical frameworks are sharp enough to prevent a simple diagnostic delay from becoming a fatal error? Thanks for joining this masterclass. Keep your frameworks tight, and we'll see you on the next explainer.